Tonight, you're not becoming a king, a knight, or even a monk. You're stepping into the muddy, smoky, deeply strange world of medieval jobs that somehow paid surprisingly well. From rat catchers earning silver in plague-ridden towns, to leech collectors standing knee-deep in freezing marshes before dawn, medieval Europe had careers so bizarre they sound completely invented, and yet people made fortunes doing them. So grab a blanket, settle by the fire, and prepare to wander through candlelit castles, muddy roads, crowded markets, and smoky taverns where some of the strangest workers in history quietly made their living. And before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these immersive medieval journeys. Now, dim the lights, and let's step slowly into the medieval night. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing beneath the dripping gate arch of a medieval market town, while cold evening mist curls around your boots like a lazy ghost that cannot quite decide whether to haunt you or simply follow you home for warmth. Rainwater slides from warped wooden roofs into muddy streets already thick with cart ruts, horse dung, and the determined optimism of people who have nowhere else to walk. Smoke from peat fires hangs low beneath the darkening sky, mixing with the smell of onions, wet wool, stale ale, and river reeds carried in from the marsh beyond the walls. A monastery bell tolls somewhere in the distance, slow and hollow, marking the hour in the old way, as though time itself has frost on its beard. Torchlight flickers across damp stone. A dog sleeps beneath a broken cartwheel. Someone nearby argues about cabbage prices with the seriousness of a royal war council. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You clutch your cloak tighter against the cold and already your shoulders ache from the road. Truthfully, you probably would not last a week out here without loudly demanding a bath and some decent bread. Unfortunately, both are in very short supply tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, comment your location and local time as you listen tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The town gate groans shut behind you with a sound like an old oak chest full of damp bones. No one hurries here. Even the guards leaning beside the gatehouse brazier seem half asleep beneath their fur-lined cloaks, warming gloved hands over smoking charcoal while pretending to inspect travellers. One scratches his beard with the end of a spear shaft. The other yawns deeply enough to frighten nearby pigeons. You pass beneath hanging lanterns toward the market square where traders are still packing away the day's business. Wooden stalls stand beneath striped cloth awnings darkened by rain. Barrels creak. Crates slam shut. Geese complain loudly about everything. At the edge of the square, tucked beneath a narrow timbered overhang, sits a man beside a small table lit by 3 beeswax candles. The candles themselves tell you something important immediately. Beeswax burns clean and steady, unlike the smoky tallow used by poorer folk. Beeswax costs silver. A man who burns 3 candles at once either has money or wants very badly to appear as though he does. The fellow wears a dark wool cap and fingerless gloves despite the cold. His eyes move constantly, sharp as fish hooks, watching every purse and hand that passes nearby. Tiny bronze scales sit beside neat stacks of coins. A thin iron rod rests across his lap. Every few moments he lifts a coin to the candlelight, bites it gently, taps it with the rod, then grunts as though personally disappointed by humanity. You slow near his table. The money changer notices immediately. Men like this notice everything immediately. "Travel coin," he asks without looking fully up. His voice sounds dry enough to crumble. You nod cautiously and place a few coins onto the table. Their surfaces are scratched from years of hands, roads, taverns, markets, and pockets damp with rain. The man picks up the first coin between blackened fingernails and holds it toward the flame. He rotates it slowly. That single sound somehow contains suspicion, boredom, insult, and professional satisfaction all at once. Around you, the market continues its evening sigh towards sleep. Merchants cover spice sacks with canvas. A woman pours leftover stew into clay bowls for labourers. Somewhere nearby, a fiddler plays half a tune before giving up entirely. Wet horses stamp against the cold. The money changer places your coin upon tiny brass scales no larger than sparrows. He adds counterweights carefully, very carefully, almost lovingly. Coin testing is serious business in this century because nearly everyone cheats whenever possible. Kings shave silver from edges. Merchants clip coins with knives. Travelling traders sometimes pass brass disguised as proper currency. Some swear that entire wars begin simply because nobody trusts anyone else's money. No one can quite agree whether the Northern Mint still uses honest silver, the man mutters. Personally, I trust cabbage merchants more than princes. A fair point, honestly. He slides one coin back toward you. Clipped. Another he keeps aside. Acceptable. A third receives a longer stare. Possibly French or cursed. You are not entirely certain he jokes. The candles hiss softly while rain taps overhead. Behind the table hangs a tiny wooden charm carved into the shape of an open eye. You notice several traders nearby wearing similar charms sewn into cloaks or purses. The money changer catches your glance. For thieves, he explains. Does it work? Not particularly. At least he is honest. He counts your acceptable coins into neat stacks, then exchanges them for local silver pennies stamped with the Lord's crest, a badly shaped lion that resembles an annoyed turnip. He wraps the coins in cloth before handing them over. His fingers are stained green from handling metal all day. A respectable income, apparently, comes from distrusting absolutely everyone from sunrise until curfew bells. You linger beneath the awning while rain thickens outside the square. The money changer does not seem eager for conversation, yet neither does he chase you away. Loneliness settles strangely in towns after dusk. Even quiet company becomes welcome. A servant hurries past carrying smoked fish wrapped in linen. 2 monks cross the square with lanterns hidden inside horn casings to shield the flame from wind. Their sandals splash through puddles while their robes sway heavily with rainwater. The money changer watches them disappear. Monastery keeps its silver locked beneath the crypt, he says quietly. 3 iron doors. You've seen it. No. He pauses, but everyone claims someone as... Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the abbey treasury truly exists, or whether monks simply spread the rumour to discourage thieves. In medieval towns, uncertainty itself becomes a kind of currency. A cold gust blows rain beneath the awning. The candles flutter wildly. The man shields them instantly with practised hands. There, he mutters, nearly lost a week's profits. You laugh softly through your scarf. Beeswax candles are expensive enough that many households save them only for feast days, births, deaths, or visits from important guests. Most evenings, common folk rely on smoky rushlights dipped in animal fat, which smell faintly like burnt soup and sadness. The square empties slowly as curfew approaches. Heavy oak shutters close across nearby shop fronts. Chains rattle. Somewhere above, a woman empties dirty water from a window with absolutely no warning whatsoever. It splashes into the street beside a passing baker who reacts with the exhausted resignation of a man already defeated by life before supper. A final bell rings from the church tower. The money changer begins packing away his scales into a small iron-bound chest secured with 2 locks. "You'll need lodging," he says. You glance toward the darkening streets. "Is there an inn nearby?" "There is an inn," he replies carefully. "Whether it improves your condition is another matter." A wonderfully medieval endorsement. Still, warmth is warmth. You pull your cloak tighter and step back into the wet square while torchlight trembles across puddles like scattered gold coins. Behind you, the money changer snuffs 2 candles, leaving only one burning beside his guarded chest as night settles fully over the town. The rain eases into a thin silver drizzle as you leave the market square behind, though the town remains wrapped in cold dampness that clings to wool, leather, and skin alike. Water drips steadily from roof eaves onto the muddy lane, each drop catching the weak glow of lanterns before vanishing into the dark earth below. Somewhere farther uphill, a smith still works late beneath an open shed, hammer blows ringing softly through the mist like slow monastery bells. You follow directions given by the money changer, and find the inn exactly where he implied it would be, standing crookedly beside the drainage ditch, leaning slightly to one side as though exhausted by several centuries of disappointing guests. The painted sign above the door shows a faded white goose holding a tankard. One wing has peeled away entirely. The bird now resembles something deeply offended by alcohol. Warm smoke spills from gaps in the shutters. More importantly, so does the smell of stew. Inside, the common room glows with firelight and beeswax candles set into iron holders blackened by soot. Rushes cover the stone floor beneath your boots, though they have not been changed recently enough to inspire confidence. Medieval inns often scatter fresh herbs among the rushes to sweeten the air, but tonight the dominant scent is still wet dog, spilled ale, onion broth, and damp wool steaming beside the hearth. Honestly, it could be worse. A great many medieval travellers sleep in barns. You duck beneath a low beam and find space near the fire where several strangers warm themselves quietly. A peddler with ink-stained fingers snores upright against the wall. 2 drovers share coarse bread beside a muddy saddle. A woman in a patched cloak knits by candlelight while occasionally glaring at everyone for reasons known only to herself. At the far end of the room, the innkeeper ladles pottage into wooden bowls. Steam curls upward in pale ribbons. You order supper with a few of your newly exchanged pennies, silently appreciating that the money changer did not hand you cursed French coin after all. The stew arrives thick with barley, cabbage, onions, and perhaps traces of meat that once held ambitious dreams of becoming recognizable. Alongside it comes a rough trencher of stale bread hard enough to survive minor warfare. Still, after a day on the road, it tastes magnificent. Outside, wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the fire cracks softly while travellers loosen cloaks and thaw stiff hands over the flames. Someone feeds the hearth another log. Sparks drift upward into soot-black rafters, where smoke gathers like storm clouds trapped indoors. You settle deeper onto the bench when the inn door suddenly opens again. Cold night air sweeps through the room carrying the smell of marsh water and wet reeds. The newcomer is an old man wrapped in oilskin and patched wool, his boots caked in black mud nearly to the knee. Thin wooden buckets hang from his shoulder pole balanced across his back. Water drips steadily from the hems of his cloak onto the floor rushes. Several people glance up briefly, then immediately return to their meals with expressions that suggest recognition mixed with mild discomfort. The old man approaches the hearth carefully, lowering his buckets beside the fire. Something inside them moves. Not quickly, not dramatically, Just enough. You stare. The innkeeper notices. Leech gatherer, she mutters while wiping a cup with suspiciously grey cloth. Marshes east of town. The old fellow warms his hands silently above the fire. His fingers are pale and swollen from cold water. Tiny scars cover the backs of both wrists. After a moment, he lifts one bucket lid slightly to inspect its contents. Inside, dark shapes writhe slowly through shallow marsh water. Leeches, dozens of them, possibly hundreds. You try not to lean too close. The old man notices anyway and chuckles beneath his beard. Better company than tax collectors, he says. Fair enough again. A serving girl brings him ale without needing to ask. Apparently he comes here often enough to earn routine treatment, though not quite enough to earn anyone sitting directly beside him. Leech gathering, you soon learn, pays surprisingly well when plague fevers, swelling, headaches, or mysterious bodily humours sweep through towns and monasteries, physicians, barber surgeons, noble households, and abbeys all purchase leeches eagerly. Bloodletting remains one of the great medical passions of the age. Some swear that too much blood causes melancholy. Others insist the body contains 4 humours forever fighting one another like drunken cousins at harvest feasts. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval medicine heals patients or simply gives them something complicated to discuss while dying. The leech gatherer drinks slowly while warming his boots near the fire. You ask whether the work is difficult. Cold, he replies. A thoughtful pause follows. Also wet. Another excellent medieval job description. He explains that leech gatherers wade barefoot into marsh pools before dawn, when mist still clings low across the reeds. The creatures attach themselves naturally to Worm's skin. Afterward, the gatherers pull them free carefully and store them in buckets lined with moss. You let them bite you, you ask. How else would they know they're employed? The room gives a tired ripple of laughter. The old man stretches his legs toward the fire while rainwater dries from his cloak in faint wisps of steam. He tells you that monasteries buy the fattest leeches because monks tend to believe deeply in organized suffering. Noble households also pay generously, especially wealthy ladies convinced that careful bleeding preserves beauty and balance. No one can quite agree whether leeches cure headaches, he says, though after enough blood leaves the body, most patients become too weak to complain. That sounds medically questionable, but strangely persuasive in this century. The innkeeper hangs bunches of rosemary and dried lavender near the hearth to sweeten the air. Herbal scents drift through smoke and stew while outside the wind moans softly beneath the eaves. You notice the old gatherer carries small charms tied around his wrists, twisted reed circles threaded with tiny fish bones. For marsh spirits, he explains after catching your glance. You believe in them. He shrugs. I believe marshes drown people. An entirely reasonable distinction. Some swear strange lights wander the wetlands before dawn, leading travellers into black water. Others claim the spirits of plague victims drift there among the reeds. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the lights are ghosts, swamp vapours, or drunken fishermen returning home late. The old gatherer simply avoids whistling in marsh country after sunset. Apparently that invites attention. You make a careful note never to whistle anywhere ever again. As the evening deepens, the common room quiets into sleepy murmurs. Candles burn lower. One traveller removes his boots with a sigh so powerful it nearly qualifies as prayer. Another wraps himself in a wool blanket beside the wall and immediately begins snoring like a distant siege engine. The leech gatherer finally rises to leave. He lifts his buckets gently, balancing the pole across narrow shoulders worn crooked by years in the marsh. Before stepping out, he pauses near your bench. If you travel east tomorrow, he says, take the river road, not the forest track. Why? Road stays firmer after rain. A sensible answer. Then after brief hesitation, he adds quietly, and some swear they hear bells in the woods where no abbey stands. The door closes behind him before you can ask more. Cold air slips briefly through the inn again. The fire crackles lower, somewhere outside. Distant monastery bells mark another passing hour while the strange old gatherer disappears into darkness, carrying his writhing buckets toward the marsh road. Morning arrives slowly, grey and damp, as though the sky itself struggles to wake. You rise from a straw mattress that feels thoughtfully designed by someone who deeply mistrusts human comfort. A draught slips through the inn shutters and brushes across your face with the chill determination of monastery discipline. Somewhere below, pots clang in the kitchen while sleepy voices trade complaints over weak ale and burnt oats. The common room still smells faintly of wet wool and last night's stew. Embers glow low in the hearth beneath a fresh layer of ash. The innkeeper moves through the room carrying trenchers stacked against one hip, while muttering darkly about travellers who somehow manage to steal spoons but never chamber pots. You eat breakfast beside the window, coarse bread, smoked fish, and pottage thick enough to repair damaged walls. Outside, the town stirs awake beneath low clouds. Market carts rattle across cobbles slick with rainwater. Apprentices sweep mud from shop fronts with absolutely no hope of success. Bells ring from the church tower, calling the faithful toward morning prayers and the less faithful toward pretending not to hear them. Before long you step back onto the road. Mist hangs above the river beyond the town walls, pale and drifting. The air smells of damp earth, chimney smoke, and cold reeds. Frost still lingers in shadowed places where wagon wheels have carved deep ruts into the road. Your boots sink slightly with every step. The leech gatherer's warning stays with you. So you choose the river road? It winds gently eastward beside slow black water bordered by willow trees and tangled reeds. Ravens hop along the bank searching for scraps while distant sheep graze beneath the watch of a half-asleep boy wrapped in a cloak far too large for him. Travel in the medieval world rarely happens quickly. People walk because horses cost money and carts break whenever they sense emotional weakness. Pilgrims, traders, messengers, tinkers, monks, and wandering labourers all drift along these roads like slow-moving currents. You pass a roadside shrine built into an ancient oak stump. Someone has left apples there beside a tiny painted saint protected by wax drippings and soot. A faded pilgrim badge hangs from a nail hammered into the bark. Some swear leaving offerings at shrines keeps wolves away during winter travel. Others insist the saints simply enjoy apples. No one can quite agree. By midday the clouds thin slightly, allowing pale sunlight to spill across the river in silver streaks. Ahead, smoke rises beyond a bend where the road widens into a busy roadside market. You hear it before you see it fully. Voices, carts creaking, goats protesting existence, and somewhere beneath it all, a man loudly advertising fragments of heaven itself. The market sprawls beside an old stone bridge where merchants cluster beneath canvas awnings tied against the wind. Fishmongers display river trout on beds of wet reeds. Potters arrange clay cups carefully upon rough boards. Fur traders shake out pelts, while arguing about prices loud enough to frighten nearby chickens. At the centre of it all stands a narrow booth draped in faded crimson cloth. Small painted saints hang from strings overhead, swaying gently in the breeze, and beneath them waits the relic seller. He is impossible to ignore. His robe, though worn at the edges, still carries traces of rich embroidery. Rings glitter on his fingers, A silver cross hangs against his chest large enough to stun an ox if thrown properly. His beard is neatly combed. His smile belongs to a man who's convinced half the world to buy things they absolutely do not need. The table before him overflows with curious treasures. Tiny glass vials, animal bones wrapped in silk, pilgrim badges stamped with saints, splinters of wood sealed carefully in wax, a feather preserved inside horn, several teeth, possibly human, hopefully not recent. The relic seller lifts one small box as travellers gather round. A fragment, he declares dramatically, from the sandal of St. Bartholomew himself. The crowd murmurs respectfully. You notice the sandal fragment looks suspiciously similar to ordinary old leather. Then again, perhaps sainthood improves presentation. A woman beside you crosses herself immediately. The relic seller spots your doubtful expression and smiles wider. You appear unconvinced, traveller. I'm cautious. A wise approach, he nods approvingly, very wise. Fortunately, I also possess verified relics. Naturally, he gestures toward another object wrapped carefully in blue cloth. This, he says in a quieter voice, is said to contain dust gathered from the tomb of St. Cuthbert. A merchant nearby gasps softly. The relic seller lowers his voice further until the entire crowd leans closer. Some swear a sick child recovered after touching the reliquary. Others claim barren fields grew green within days. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the crowd believes him fully or merely wishes to. That is often enough. In the medieval world, relics carry enormous power. Pilgrims travel hundreds of miles to kneel before saintly bones, preserved fingers, scraps of cloth, or tiny glass vials of mysterious origin. Churches compete fiercely for famous relics because holy visitors bring offerings, reputation, and coin. Of course, this creates one small problem. There are apparently enough saintly finger bones across Europe to assemble several complete saints, and perhaps one extra bishop. You wander closer while the relic seller continues his performance beneath fluttering banners and drifting incense smoke. Yes, he says smoothly, lifting another object. The authenticity has been questioned by jealous rivals and at least one bishop, which, naturally, proves its importance. An impressive strategy. Beside the booth sits a small locked chest reinforced with iron bands. Two young assistants guard it nervously while watching the crowd. Money changes hands steadily. Very steadily. The relic seller notices your interest and motions you nearer. For a modest donation, he says, travellers may receive blessing tokens against fever, drowning, storms, thieves, and unfortunate marriages. Do they work? For marriages he sighs sadly. The saints themselves struggle there. A few listeners chuckle. He offers you a tiny pewter pilgrim badge shaped like a scallop shell. Protection for roads and rivers. You turn it carefully in your fingers. The metal feels cold. Perhaps genuine. Perhaps worthless. Perhaps both simultaneously. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether relic sellers are holy men, skilled performers, or merchants clever enough to understand that fear travels faster than truth. A gust of wind rattles the bridge banners overhead while nearby traders shout over fish prices. Somewhere behind the market, monastery bells drift faintly through the afternoon air. The relic seller leans closer. Between us, he whispers, people sleep better carrying blessings. You cannot entirely argue with that. So, after brief hesitation, you purchase the small pilgrim badge and fasten it inside your cloak beside your purse. The relic seller bows theatrically. May the saints guide your road, he says, or at least discourage wolves. Again, a fair standard for medieval travel. You leave the crowded bridge market as daylight begins fading toward evening once more. Behind you, the relic seller's voice continues rising over the river wind while travellers gather eagerly around his booth beneath the fluttering crimson cloth. Ahead, the road stretches onward through damp fields and gathering mist. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the sound of water and bells, a dog begins barking sharply at something unseen along the darkening roadside. By the time evening settles properly across the countryside, the road has narrowed into little more than 2 muddy tracks bordered by thorn hedges and frost-bent grass. The last traces of daylight fade behind low clouds the colour of old iron. Wind moves softly through bare branches overhead, carrying the smell of damp leaves, chimney smoke, and distant rain waiting patiently somewhere beyond the hills. Your boots ache. Your shoulders ache. Even your cloak seems tired. The pilgrim badge hidden inside your tunic presses lightly against your chest as you walk, cool as river stone. Every now and then you touch it without thinking, as though the little scrap of pewter might somehow keep wolves, thieves, bad weather, and disappointing suppers at a respectful distance. So far, results remain mixed. Ahead, faint lantern light flickers through the mist. A cluster of buildings slowly emerges beside the roadside low timber houses, leaning sheds, and a broad granary raised on thick stone supports to discourage rats from climbing inside. Smoke curls upward from narrow chimneys, while somewhere nearby pigs grunt sleepily in their pens. You hear barking again. Sharp. Persistent. Then suddenly a small dog bursts from beneath a cart and races directly toward you. It is not an impressive creature. Its fur sticks out in damp clumps. One ear folds incorrectly. Its legs appear assembled by committee, yet its eyes shine with fierce determination as it circles your boots, barking furiously at absolutely nothing visible. A man follows moments later carrying a hooded lantern and a long ash staff. Rags, he sighs, leave the traveller be. The dog ignores him completely. The man approaches with the weary patience of someone long accustomed to apologizing for this animal's opinions. He wears heavy leather gloves and a thick cloak patched repeatedly at elbows and shoulders. Iron traps hang from his belt beside small canvas sacks that rattle softly when he walks. The lantern light reveals narrow scars crossing both hands. Evening, he says, you're headed for shelter. You nod gratefully. He gestures toward the village ahead. There's ale if the brewer still feels charitable. A pause. He usually doesn't. You fall into step beside him while the dog continues patrolling the roadside like an underpaid knight. The man introduces himself simply as Martin. Rat catcher. The words alone earn small glances from villagers as you enter the settlement. A woman drawing water from the well crosses herself quickly. 2 boys carrying firewood move aside to let him pass. Nobody seems afraid exactly, yet everyone watches him carefully. In medieval towns and villages, rat catchers occupy a peculiar place somewhere between respected labourer and wandering omen. Rats destroy grain stores, spread sickness, chew through sacks, and generally behave like tiny furry punishments sent by God for administrative reasons nobody fully understands. A good rat catcher earns steady coin. A very good one earns gratitude usually reserved for saints and miracle-working bakers. Martin leads you toward the granary while Rags darts ahead, sniffing every barrel doorway and woodpile with manic focus. You travel alone, Martin asks. For now. Safer than groups sometimes. You glance sideways. How so? Groups argue. A difficult point to dispute. The granary doors stand open beneath lantern light. Inside, workers stack barley sacks beneath heavy timber beams blackened by age and smoke. Cats roam freely across the rafters, though judging by the rat catcher's expression, They are failing badly at their assigned duties. Rags stiffens suddenly. The little dog gives a low growl and bolts beneath a pile of grain sacks. Several workers step back instantly. Martin sets down his lantern calmly and removes one trap from his belt. The movement looks practiced enough to happen in his sleep. "You may wish to stand farther away," he says. A sensible recommendation. There comes a burst of furious scratching, a sharp squeal, and then silence. Rags emerges proudly carrying a very large rat in his jaws. The workers cheer softly. One tosses Martin a small coin immediately. You stare at the dog. The dog stares back with the unmistakable expression of someone expecting applause. "Good beast," Martin says, scratching behind one crooked ear. Rags nearly vibrates with pride. The granary keeper approaches, carrying a lantern close to inspect the dead rat. "Nasty things," he mutters, "chewed through 3 sacks last week." "No one can quite agree where they all come from," another worker says darkly. "Some swear they climb from old burial pits beneath the town." Martin rolls his eyes gently. "They come from other rats." A refreshing commitment to realism. Still, superstition clings stubbornly to medieval life. Many people believe rats appear wherever sin festers too heavily. Others nail charms above granary doors to ward off vermin. Some villages bury dead rats beneath thresholds during harvest season for luck, which unfortunately sounds more cursed than lucky. Martin receives payment in grain, smoked fish, and several precious pennies. Surprisingly good earnings for one evening's work. "Better than ploughing frozen fields," he says quietly while resetting traps. You help him carry equipment toward the brewer's house where villagers gather after dark beside outdoor braziers. Warm light spills from shutter cracks onto muddy ground. Someone plays a pipe badly enough to concern nearby livestock. Inside, the brewer serves dark ale in heavy clay cups while steam rises from a pot of onion broth hanging above the hearth. The room smells wonderfully alive yeast, smoke, wet leather, boiled cabbage, and roasting chestnuts. Martin settles onto a bench near the fire. Rags curls beneath the table immediately, exhausted from heroic public service. Villagers greet the rat-catcher cautiously but respectfully. One old woman presses dried herbs into his hand for luck. Another asks whether he might inspect her cellar tomorrow morning. "Something scratching beneath the floorboards," she whispers. Martin nods without surprise. "Probably rats." The woman crosses herself anyway. You sip warm ale while firelight flickers across oak beams overhead. Beeswax candles burn beside tiny bowls of salt meant to purify the room against illness. Outside, wind rattles loose shutters while distant owls call through the dark fields. A shepherd nearby tells a story about a monastery cellar so infested with rats that monks claim they heard squeaking beneath choir hymns during prayer. Some swear the creatures understood Latin, he says solemnly. "Did they?" "No," Martin replies, "but one apparently stole communion bread." That earns tired laughter around the hearth. Hours drift softly onward. The brewer adds fresh wood to the fire. Someone passes around coarse bread with soft cheese wrapped in cloth. The warmth begins loosening road stiffness from your bones, while outside the night grows colder and deeper. Martin eventually rises. "Come," he says quietly. "You can sleep in the loft if you don't mind dogs." Rags lifts his head proudly as though personally responsible for local accommodations. Honestly, perhaps he is. You follow the rat-catcher upstairs beneath low rafters, where hay beds lie scattered across the loft beside hanging herbs and sacks of winter grain. Through gaps in the wooden walls you can see faint moonlight silvering the dark fields beyond the village. Below, the last murmurs of the alehouse fade slowly into silence. Rags circles twice beside your blanket before collapsing heavily against your boots. and somewhere far off across the sleeping countryside, bells ring faintly through the cold night mist once more. You wake before dawn to the smell of hay, damp timber, and dog breath. Rags lie sprawled across your feet like a collapsed fur cloak with the pinions. Somewhere below the loft, someone stirs the hearth fire back to life. Wood crackles softly. A rooster announces the morning with the confidence of a creature entirely unaware that most people dislike him deeply before sunrise. Cold air slips through the slats in the wool beside your blanket. Outside, the village still sleeps beneath a pale layer of frost. Thin smoke rises from chimneys into the dark blue sky, while stars fade slowly behind drifting mist. Martin is already awake. Of course he is. Men who spend their lives hunting rats develop strange relationships with sleep. You climb carefully down the ladder into the brewer's hall where weak morning light mixes with fire glow across rough oak tables sticky from last night's ale. The brewer's wife hands you warm oat bread without speaking much beyond a tired nod. Medieval hospitality often functions less like friendliness and more like practical acknowledgement that freezing travellers create inconvenient corpses near doorways. You eat quietly beside the fire while Martin checks traps laid overnight around the grain sheds. Rags follows importantly. The little dog returns moments later carrying another wrap with the triumphant expression of a knight returning from crusade. Productive morning, Martin says. The brewer tosses him 2 more pennies. Again, surprisingly good money. You mention as much while fastening your cloak. Martin shrugs. People pay well when grain starts disappearing. A fair truth in every century, honestly. By sunrise you leave the village together, following a narrow cart road toward the nearest town. Frost crunches beneath your boots while mist curls low across empty fields. Bare trees stand black against the growing light like old ink drawings scratched across parchment. Rags trots ahead, sniffing constantly. Martin carries his traps over one shoulder, while thin winter sunlight glimmers on the iron jaws. Heading farther east, he asks. You nod. Toward the river towns. Then you'll pass Blackwater Keep by nightfall. The name hangs oddly in the cold air. You ask whether the keep belongs to some lord. Belongs to falcons, Martin replies. You wait for elaboration. It does not arrive immediately. Travellers in the medieval world often speak in half-finished statements as though conversation itself costs money. Eventually he continues, The lord keeps birds there, hunting hawks mostly, valuable creatures. Some nobles spend astonishing fortunes on falconry. A trained hunting bird becomes both practical tool and living symbol of status. Kings exchange hawks as gifts. Ladies carry them during processions. Entire laws exist regulating who may own which species. A peasant caught hunting with a noble's falcon could face brutal punishment. A noble caught behaving foolishly usually faces supper. Different standards entirely. The road climbs gently through woodland where frost still clings to roots and dead leaves. Sunlight filters weakly through bare branches overhead. Somewhere deeper in the trees, woodcutters chop timber in slow, steady rhythm. You pass a wayside cross draped in faded ribbons left by travellers seeking safe roads. Tiny iron charms hang beside it, miniature keys, birds, and saints hammered crudely from tin. Some swear iron wards away forest spirits. Others simply enjoy hanging things on posts. No one can quite agree. By midday you reach a small crossroads market crowded with mule carts and peddlers selling winter goods beneath canvas awnings stiff with frost. Smoke rises from cooking fires while merchants shout over one another about wool, smoked fish, onions, and miracle cures involving alarming amounts of vinegar. Martin pauses only briefly to purchase smoked eel wrapped in cloth. Then the sound arrives. A deep horn call drifting across the fields. Everyone nearby turns instinctively toward the distant hill beyond the crossroads. Blackwater Keep rises there against the grey sky. It is not enormous, yet its dark stone towers loom heavily above the countryside like watchful giants. Narrow banners snap in the wind from high battlements. Smoke pours steadily from inner chimneys. Around the lower walls stretch kennels, stables, and long wooden mews where hunting birds are housed beneath sloping roofs. Even from here you hear them faintly. Sharp cries. Wild and high. Martin nods toward the hill. Falconer trains birds before dusk. You continue upward along the muddy road leading toward the keep while carts creak downhill past you. The higher you climb, the colder the wind becomes. Your cloak snaps against your legs. Ravens circle above the battlements. At the gatehouse, guards wrapped in fur-lined cloaks inspect arrivals beside a brazier glowing orange against the stone. Martin exchanges a few words with them before moving on. Apparently rat catchers are welcome almost everywhere grain exists. Inside the outer yard, the world changes. Stable boys hurry between horses, servants carry firewood across icy cobbles, smiths hammer horseshoes beneath open sheds while kitchen smoke drifts warmly from the hall. And above it all, falcons wheel through the pale afternoon sky. You spot the falconer immediately. He stands near the mews wearing a heavy leather glove reaching almost to the elbow. A hooded hawk rests upon his wrist, perfectly still except for tiny movements of its feathers in the wind. Thin leather jesses hang from its legs decorated with small silver bells that chime softly whenever it shifts. The falconer himself looks weathered as old oak bark. Grey threads run through his beard. His cloak smells faintly of feathers, leather oil, and cold air. A young servant rushes toward him carrying raw meat wrapped in linen. The hawk notices instantly. Its sharp eyes lock onto the offering with terrifying focus. Easy now, the falconer murmurs. The bird remains utterly calm. You approach carefully while Martin heads toward the granaries to inspect stores for vermin. The falconer studies you briefly. Traveller. Yes. He nods toward the hawk. She judges you acceptable. A tremendous honour, apparently. The bird tilts its head slightly. Its golden eyes seem far too intelligent for comfort. Falconers occupy strange positions within noble households. Though technically servants, skilled handlers earn excellent pay, warm lodging, steady food, and unusual trust from powerful lords. Noble hunting birds cost fortunes to breed and train properly. Some swear certain falcons recognize insults. Others claim hawks can sense cowardice before battle. Even now, it is hard to tell whether nobles admire the birds for hunting skill or simply envy their ability to ignore everyone elegantly. The falconer lifts the hood gently from the hawk's head. Instant transformation. The creature sharpens into alert stillness so complete it almost hurts to watch. Then with one swift motion the falconer casts it skyward. The hawk rises instantly into the cold air above the keep. Not flapping wildly, not struggling, simply climbing. Graceful and terrifying all at once. You lose sight of it briefly against the clouds before it circles high above the towers. The falconer whistles softly. A rabbit-skin lure spins through the air on a leather cord. The hawk folds its wings and suddenly drops from the sky like falling iron. The strike happens so quickly your eyes barely follow it. The bird lands upon the lure with fierce precision while stable boys nearby cheer quietly. The falconer smiles for the first time. Good girl. The tiny silver bells chime softly as the hawk returns to his glove. Around you, evening settles over Blackwater Keep. Torches flare along the walls. Kitchen servants carry steaming pots toward the hall. Somewhere beyond the battlements, monastery bells echo faintly through the darkening countryside once again. and above the cold stone yard, hawks continue circling beneath the winter sky like living shadows drifting between earth and heaven. Night settles heavily over Blackwater Keep, drawing long shadows across the inner yard while torchlight flickers against wet stone walls. Cold wind slips through the battlements carrying the smell of wood smoke, horses, and distant snow somewhere far beyond the hills. Servants hurry across the courtyard with lowered heads, balancing baskets of bread, buckets of ale, and bundles of firewood against the growing frost. You remain near the Falcon Mews a while longer, reluctant to leave the strange calm surrounding the birds. Inside the long-timbered structure, rows of hawks and falcons perch quietly beneath hooded lanterns. Leather jesses hang from narrow legs. Tiny silver bells chime softly whenever a bird shifts upon its stand. The air smells of feathers, straw, lamp oil, and raw meat kept cold inside wooden chest packed with the river ice. The falconer moves among them with practiced care, every motion slow, steady, respectful. You notice immediately that he speaks more gently to the birds than most people speak to one another. This one came from Northern Cliffs, he says, stopping beside a pale gerfalcon almost white as snow. Cost the Lord enough silver to build 3 cottages. The bird watches you through half-lidded eyes. You try not to appear poorer than the average cottage. The falconer feeds small strips of meat to the hawk from gloved fingers, while explaining how noble households prize certain birds according to rank. Kings may fly eagles, earls favour peregrines, lesser nobles keep goshawks. Priests sometimes prefer smaller merlins because apparently even medieval clergy enjoy tiny efficient predators now and then. Peasants, meanwhile, mostly keep chickens that actively attempt their own deaths. The falconer gestures toward a wooden bench near the Mew's hearth. Sit, he says, warm yourself. You gladly obey. Heat rises from glowing coals beneath an iron brazier, while outside snow begins drifting lightly through the dark courtyard. Stable boys curse softly while covering water troughs against freezing. The falconer removes his gloves carefully. His hands surprise you. Scarred. Deeply scarred. Thin white lines cross his fingers and wrists like old cracks in river ice. Birds, you ask quietly. Some. A pause. Others from lords. Another fair answer. Servants within noble keeps live close to privilege without ever truly touching it. Falconers dine better than peasants, yet far below knights. They sleep indoors, earn silver, and travel on hunts through forests most villagers only glimpse from roads. Still, one mistake with a prized bird can destroy years of trust instantly. No one can quite agree whether noble households reward loyalty or merely rent it temporarily. The falconer pours warmed ale from a small iron pot into clay cups. Outside, bells ring faintly from the keep chapel marking evening prayers. Somewhere above the yard, ravens croak from the towers while snow gathers slowly along parapets. You sip carefully. The ale tastes smoky and thick with honey. Ever hunted with them, you ask? The falconer nods. Since boyhood. He leans back beside the brazier while the fire paints shifting gold across weathered features. His father trained hawks before him. He explains. So did his grandfather. Entire families sometimes serve noble estates generation after generation, passing trades like inherited tools. Falconry knowledge moves quietly through bloodlines' whistles, feeding habits, weather signs, breeding secrets. Some swear certain handlers can calm angry hawks simply by humming church hymns. Others insist birds recognize their masters after years apart. Even now, it is hard to tell where skill ends and superstition begins. The falconer reaches beside the hearth and lifts a small leather hood stitched beautifully with coloured thread. Made by my wife, he says. You examine the craftsmanship carefully. Tiny embroidered stars cover the hood edges in faded blue silk. She lives here, in the lower village. A softness enters his voice briefly. Birds frighten her. You glance toward the silent hawks lined beneath lantern glow. Reasonable again. One young servant enters carrying fresh straw bundles. Snow dusts his shoulders white. The Lord rides tomorrow, the boy says nervously. The falconer nods. Then we rise before dawn. The servant hesitates before leaving. They say Lady Agnes wants the white hawk. At this, the falconer exhales slowly through his nose. She always wants the white hawk. Apparently medieval court politics extend even into bird preferences. You ask whether nobles truly care so deeply about hunting. The falconer gives you a long look. For some lords, hunting matters more than war. Considering how often medieval nobles seem eager for both, that feels mildly concerning. Outside the mews, snow thickens gradually across the keep yard. Torches hiss softly beneath falling flakes. Guards pace the walls wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, while kitchen smoke drifts warmly upward into darkness. The falconer eventually rises. "Come," he says, "hall fire should still burn." You follow him across the courtyard toward the keep's great hall, where light spills golden through narrow windows. The heavy oak doors open onto warmth, noise, and the glorious smell of roasted meat. Inside, long trestle tables stretch beneath soot-dark rafters hung with banners and antlers. Beeswax candles glow from iron chandeliers overhead, while servants weave between benches carrying trenchers piled with food. The hall hums with the low steady sound of medieval evening life. Knights remove gloves stiff with cold. Hunters boast quietly beside the fire. Dogs sleep beneath tables waiting hopefully for falling scraps. A musician plucks soft notes from a lute near the hearth, while smoke curls lazily upward through roof vents. You sit near the lower tables among servants, craftsmen, and retainers, while bowls of stew circulate alongside dark bread and roasted onions. The falconer receives respectful nods from nearly everyone passing. Clearly skilled birdmen rank surprisingly high in castle society. A one-eyed cook places smoked goose before your bench. "Eat quickly," she warns. Steward counts portions like a tax collector counts sins. You obey immediately. The stew tastes rich with herbs and winter root vegetables. Warmth spreads slowly through your tired limbs, while outside snow taps softly against shuttered windows. At the far end of the hall, noble voices drift beneath hanging banners. Lady Agnes herself sits beside the lord beneath candlelight, pale fingers wrapped around silver wine cups while servants attend quietly nearby. You notice a hooded hawk perched beside her chair. Of course, the falconer follows your gaze. That bird bites everyone except her. Why? No one knows. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether Lady Agnes trained the hawk personally, or whether the creature simply developed excellent judgment. As supper continues, conversation softens gradually into sleepy murmurs. One elderly steward tells stories about a hunting falcon that supposedly flew across 3 kingdoms before returning home years later. A true tale, he insists. Impossible, mutters a nearby groom. The steward sniffs. Young people doubt everything except bad ideas. A timeless complaint. The fire burns lower, candles shorten. Snow continues falling beyond thick stone walls while servants spread fresh rushes across damp patches near the doorways. Eventually the falconer stands. "You may sleep near the mews," he says. "Warmer than the stables, less snoring than the barracks." An attractive combination. You thank him and follow once more through the quiet courtyard where snow now blankets the cobbles in pale silver. Above the towers, clouds drift slowly across the moon. Inside the mews, The hawks rest silently beneath hooded lanterns. Tiny bells chime softly in the darkness, and somewhere beyond the frozen walls of Blackwater Keep, deep in the sleeping countryside, distant monastery bells answer faintly through the winter night. Before dawn fully arrives, the bells of the keep chapel pull you gently from sleep, soft at first, then louder, then impossible to ignore. The sound rolls through the frozen courtyard and beneath the timber roof of the mews, where pale morning light barely touches the rafters. The hawks stir quietly upon their perches, feathers rustling like dry parchment in the cold. Frost feathers the inside edges of the shutters. Your breath hangs white above the wool blanket. Nearby, the falconer is already awake, of course. He moves through the mews carrying a lantern hooded against sudden brightness, checking leather straps and feeding the birds tiny portions of meat before the day's hunt. Outside, stable boys curse softly while breaking ice from water buckets with wooden mallets. You sit up slowly, every joint protesting medieval life once again. Rags, who apparently followed you all the way from the village sometime during the night, lifts his head from a straw pile near the brazier and yawns enormously. You stare at him. The dog stares back without explanation. Honestly, fair enough. The falconer notices and simply shrugs. He adopted you. Apparently this is how friendships happen now. The keep wakes around you in layers of sound, horses stamping in stables, kitchen servants splitting wood, distant voices echoing through stone corridors. Somewhere above, a raven croaks from the battlements while snow slides heavily from roof edges into the courtyard below. You help carry hunting gear toward the main gate where riders gather beneath torchlight and drifting breath. Lady Agnes appears wrapped in deep blue wool trimmed with white fur. The hooded hawk rests calmly upon her gloved wrist while servants adjust saddle straps nearby. Her expression suggests someone entirely accustomed to cold mornings and immediate obedience. The lord of the keep mounts beside her, broad beneath layers of leather and fur. Hunting horns hang from several saddles. Hounds bark impatiently against their leashes. The falconer hands you a small bundle of bread and smoked meat. For the road, he says. You're not hunting. He shakes his head. Birds hunt. I make certain nobles survive standing near them. An important distinction. As the hunting party rides out through the gates into the snowy countryside, you remain behind beside the falconer and a few servants tasked with quieter work. Smoke rises from chimneys into pale grey skies, while the keep settles into its slower daytime rhythm. Snow muffles everything. Footsteps softened. Voices drift. Even the crows sound distant somehow. The falconer spends the morning cleaning equipment and mending leather hoods near the brazier. You help where you can, though mostly you succeed in handing him tools without dropping them into the fire. Outside the mews, the keep steward supervises servants spreading salt across icy paths while kitchen boys haul barrels toward winter storehouses. Life inside a medieval castle never truly pauses. Hundreds of small tasks hold the place together like stitches in an old cloak. By midday, clouds thicken again. Snow begins falling harder. The falconer glances toward the gatehouse. They'll return early. He is correct. The hunting party arrives before sunset beneath swirling snow and fading light. Horses steam in the cold air while servants hurry forward to assist. The hounds appear delighted with themselves regardless of results. Lady Agnes dismounts beside the mews holding her hawk carefully. Its feathers gleam pale silver beneath the snow. The falconer notices immediately. Successful. A small smile touches her face. Servants carry rabbits and pheasants toward the kitchens while horns echo briefly through the courtyard. Yet amid the returning noise, another sound slowly emerges from beyond the keep walls. low chanting, steady, mournful. You glance toward the gatehouse as several villagers enter the outer yard carrying black lanterns and beeswax candles protected beneath horn casings. Their cloaks are dark, their faces solemn. At the centre walks a woman entirely veiled in grey wool. The courtyard quiets slightly. Even the servants lower their voices. A funeral, you ask softly. The falconer nods. From the lower village. The veiled woman passes slowly across the snow-covered stones while two boys carry a wooden chest behind her. Small bells tied to the lantern poles chime gently in the wind. Professional mourners. You've heard whispers of such work before, men and women hired to attend funerals, lead prayers, weep publicly, sing laments, and guide grieving households through death rituals properly enough to satisfy both priest and village gossip. In a world where memory matters deeply, mourning itself becomes skilled labour. The falconer watches them cross the yard. They pay her well, he murmurs. Why hire mourners? Because some families are too tired to cry. That answer settles heavily. Snow continues falling around the little procession while chapel bells toll once again across the keep. The veiled mourner pauses near the chapel steps where more villagers wait holding candles against the darkening afternoon. Her voice rises softly beneath the snow. Not singing exactly, not speaking either. Something between prayer and story. The words drift across the courtyard almost hypnotically. She recites the dead man's life, his trade, his family, the winters survived, the roads walked, the saints honoured, the debts forgiven. Medieval funerals often serve partly as memory, partly as warning, and partly as negotiation with heaven itself. Some swear the dead linger nearby until properly mourned. Others insist forgotten souls wander roads forever after. No one can quite agree. You move closer beneath the chapel archway where candlelight flickers warmly against stone walls. The smell of incense mixes with melting snow and damp wool. Inside the chapel, monks prepare the altar beneath painted saints darkened by centuries of smoke. Beeswax candles glow beside iron candelabras while Latin prayers echo softly beneath the vaulted ceiling. The professional mourner removes her veil. She is older than expected. Lines crease her face deeply around sharp grey eyes that miss nothing. When she notices you watching, she gives the slightest nod before continuing her work. Her voice changes with each part of the ritual. Soft during prayers, firm while naming the dead man's virtues, almost musical during the lament. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether mourners truly feel the grief they perform or whether years of funerals simply teach them how sorrow sounds. Perhaps both. A young widow kneels beside the coffin, clutching wool gloves tightly in trembling hands. The mourner places one steady hand upon her shoulder without interrupting the chant. That simple gesture somehow quiets the room more effectively than any sermon. Outside, darkness settles fully across Blackwater Keep. Snow thickens against the chapel windows. The bells continue their slow, measured tolling while incense curls upward into shadows above the altar. You remain through most of the service listening to prayers blend with wind beyond the stone walls. Medieval nights often feel crowded with things unseen: saints, spirits, fears, old stories carried through generations beside winter fires. And beneath it all runs the steady certainty that life is fragile. Roads are long, and even grief itself sometimes becomes honest work for those skilled enough to carry it gently. When the funeral finally ends, the professional mourner steps back into the snowy courtyard beneath lantern glow. Her candles flicker softly in the wind, and somewhere high above the keep, unseen in the darkness, a hawk cries once before silence settles over the frozen world again. Snow lingers over Blackwater Keep for 2 more quiet days before the weather finally softens into cold grey rain again. Water drips steadily from battlements, gathers in the courtyard ruts, and turns every path into slick brown misery. The hawks remain hooded indoors while servants mutter darkly about mould, damp firewood, and boots that never fully dry. You spend the mornings helping wherever hands are needed, carrying grain sacks, fetching water, trying not to embarrass yourself around horses large enough to view humans mainly as disappointing furniture. Rags continues appearing unexpectedly beside you as though assigned by fate itself. The little dog now treats the keeper's personal territory, barking furiously at geese, stable cats, suspicious barrels, and once, rather boldly, at a knight carrying a goose pie. The knight surrendered the pie crust immediately. An impressive tactical victory. By the third evening, the rain slackens enough for travellers to arrive once more through the gatehouse. Merchants bring wool and smoked fish from the western roads. A monk arrives carrying letters sealed in red wax. 2 wandering musicians trade songs for supper beside the hearth. And just after dusk, another stranger enters the keep courtyard, pushing a narrow handcart beneath a patched canvas cover. The reaction from the servants is immediate. Some grin knowingly. Others groan. One kitchen maid crosses herself. The newcomer lifts a hand cheerfully. "Good people," he calls. "Fortune smiles tonight. I bring healing, relief, and only moderate screaming." "Ah, a tooth drawer?" You follow the growing crowd toward the outer hall, where the traveller sets up beneath hanging lanterns and dripping roof beams. Rain taps steadily outside while inside the fire crackles warmly beside gathered servants, guards, and villagers from nearby cottages. The tooth drawer moves with theatrical confidence. His coat is stitched from mismatched cloth patches in cheerful colours, faded by years of travel. Small charms hang from his belt beside knives, tongs, glass jars of herbs, and several instruments that look deeply unfriendly to human mouths. A lute hangs across his back. Naturally, many wandering healers survive partly through entertainment. If you cannot cure pain entirely, distracting people becomes the next best business model. The tooth drawer bows dramatically before the crowd. "Master Hugo at your service," he announces, licensed by absolutely nobody, feared by rotten teeth everywhere. A few servants laugh nervously. The man grins wider. He has the smile of someone entirely confident that all remaining teeth still belong roughly where intended. A rough wooden stool stands at the centre of his little setup beside a lantern, and small brazier heating irons over glowing coals. The sight alone causes several onlookers to instinctively cover their mouths. You wisely do the same. Dental care in the medieval world is, unfortunately, a deeply adventurous experience. Most people rely on herbs, prayers, vinegar rinses, or simply enduring pain until endurance becomes impossible. Then comes the tooth drawer. Hugo notices your expression immediately. You look concerned, traveller. "I enjoy keeping my teeth. A beautiful ambition." He pats the stool fondly. Sadly, ambition often loses. A kitchen servant soon volunteers after days of miserable jaw pain. The poor fellow sits trembling while Hugo examines his mouth beneath lantern light. The tooth drawer mutters. Yes, this tooth has abandoned all moral principles. The crowd murmurs sympathetically. Hugo produces iron tongs from a leather roll, while simultaneously beginning a cheerful song about a bishop who supposedly lost 5 teeth biting walnuts during Lent. Whether true or not, the performance works brilliantly. Half the crowd laughs. The patient forgets briefly to panic. Then the extraction happens. Quick, sharp, mercifully not too dramatic. The servant staggers up moments later, clutching a rag against his mouth. while Hugo triumphantly raises the offending tooth overhead like a hunter displaying dangerous prey. The crowd applauds. Honestly, mostly from relief. The servant pays with silver pennies and half a smoked sausage. Again, surprisingly profitable work. Hugo drops the tooth into a small wooden box already rattling with others collected over the years. You keep them, you ask. Of course. Why? He shrugs. Memories. That answer somehow feels worse. Rain rattles harder against the shutters while the fire throws warm orange light across the crowded hall. The smell of cloves, smoke, wet wool, and heated iron fills the air. Hugo cleans his tools carefully between patients using wine and herbs. Surprisingly professional, all things considered. Some swear carrying wolf teeth prevents toothaches entirely. Others tie holy charms around swollen jaws or sleep with garlic beneath pillows. No one can quite agree whether any remedy truly works better than luck. Hugo himself recommends avoiding hard nuts, bad ale, and fist fights. Reasonable medical guidance at last. Between extractions, he plays lively tunes upon the lute, while telling stories gathered from roads across half the kingdom. Travellers drift closer to listen. Even the falconer eventually appears beside the doorway, arms crossed while Rags sleeps near his boots. One abbey near the coast, Hugo says dramatically, keeps the preserved tooth of a saint in a silver box. A real saint, someone asks. A very expensive saint. The hall erupts softly with tired laughter. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether holy teeth heal sickness or merely encourage excellent donations. Hugo eventually notices the little pilgrim badge pinned inside your cloak. Bought from a relic seller. You nod. Bridge Market 3 days west. Ah. He strums the lute thoughtfully. Thin fellow silk gloves smiles like a fox reading scripture. The very same. Hugo snorts softly. He once sold a bishop 3 feathers supposedly plucked from an angel. Were they goose? A pause. Very confident goose. The fire burns lower as evening deepens. Candles shorten. Rainwater slides down the keep walls outside while wind moans softly through the battlements overhead. One elderly groom finally approaches Hugo with visible reluctance. My wife says I grind my teeth in sleep. Hugo nods seriously. Happens often during winter. Can you cure it? Certainly. The old groom brightens hopefully. Hugo hands him a cup of ale. Drink this until you stop caring. Honestly, medieval medicine continues improving steadily. Later, after the crowd thins, you sit near the hearth while Hugo polishes his instruments beside the glow of the coals. Without the theatrical grin, he suddenly looks older, tired around the eyes. You travel constantly, you ask quietly. Mostly. Never settle anywhere. The tooth drawer stares into the fire a while before answering. Roads are easier once you grow used to leaving. Outside, monastery bells drift faintly through the rain-soaked night. The sound lingers inside the hall among crackling wood and sleepy murmurs. Hugo finally closes his tool case with a sigh. My father was a barber surgeon, he says softly. Taught me the trade young. He taps the wooden tooth box thoughtfully. People always need pain removed. No one can quite argue with that either. Before sleeping, Hugo hangs small bunches of rosemary and mint near the hearth to sweeten the hall air. Travellers settle beneath blankets while servants extinguish extra candles one by one. The fire dims slowly into glowing embers. Rain continues whispering beyond the shutters, and beside the warmth of the keep hall, beneath hanging herbs and soot-dark rafters, the wandering tooth drawer drifts quietly to sleep with a box full of memories rattling softly at his side. Rain follows the dawn like an unwanted travelling companion. Thin at first, then steady, then relentless. Water drums upon the roofs of Blackwater Keep and pours from stone gargoyles into overflowing courtyard drains. The world beyond the walls disappears beneath drifting grey mist while servants hurry through the cold, carrying cloaks over baskets and bundles. Inside the keep hall, breakfast unfolds sleepily beside smoky hearth fires. Steam rises from oat porridge thick enough to mortar bricks. The tooth drawer Hugo tunes his lute near the benches while pretending not to notice a kitchen maid carefully avoiding hard bread after last night's extraction. Rags sleeps beneath the table wrapped somehow in stolen sackcloth. The falconer enters carrying a leather satchel and nods toward you. Road south clears by midday, he says, if you still mean to travel. You do, though leaving warmth behind feels increasingly foolish. Still, medieval roads wait for nobody except perhaps bishops, and even they complain constantly about mud. You gather your few belongings while rain softens into mist once more. Before departing, the falconer presses a small packet into your hand. Dried herbs wrapped in cloth. For wet lungs, he explains, boil in water. You thank him sincerely. Whether the herbs truly cure illness or merely convince people they're trying remains uncertain. Medieval remedies often balance somewhere between medicine, tradition, and hopeful cooking. Some swear rosemary strengthens memory. Others claim lavender calms troubled dreams. One stable boy insists boiled onion protects against plague, though admittedly it may simply keep everyone farther away from you. The gates of Blackwater Keep creak open shortly before noon. You leave beneath low skies while ravens circle slowly above the towers. Behind you, hawks cry faintly from the mews as the keep fades into mist and rain. The southern road winds through wet farmland and sparse woodland, where puddles reflect pale skies between roots and stones. Travellers pass rarely today. Most sensible people remain indoors whenever possible. Unfortunately, sensible people rarely become interesting storytellers. By late afternoon, you reach the outskirts of a monastery village nestled beside a shallow river. Grey stone walls rise above clustered cottages roofed in damp straw. Bells echo softly through the drizzle, while smoke drifts from chimneys smelling faintly of peat and wet oak. At the village centre stands the monastery itself. Large, quiet, ancient enough that portions of the walls lean slightly as though tired from centuries of prayer. Monks move silently between covered walkways in dark robes heavy with rainwater. A carved stone saint watches from above the gate arch, face worn nearly smooth by weather and time. You enter the outer yard where chickens wander freely beside stacked firewood and rain barrels overflowing onto mossy stones. A young novice greets you politely. His fingers are stained black with ink. "Traveller seeking shelter?" he asks. You nod gratefully. The novice smiles faintly. Then you arrive on a copping day. As though this explains everything. Inside the monastery guest house, warmth settles around you immediately. Beeswax candles burn steadily beside whitewashed walls, while braziers glow with comforting heat. The air smells of vellum, damp wool, candle smoke, and herbs drying from ceiling beams. Monasteries serve many purposes in the medieval world: prayer, healing, learning, brewing, farming, and sometimes simply surviving winter behind thick walls. Travellers often rely on them for shelter, especially during storms or dangerous seasons. The novice leads you through a stone corridor where rain taps softly against narrow windows. Brother Aldrich oversees the scriptorium today. He says he enjoys visitors. That phrasing contains mild danger. The scriptorium lies beyond an oak door reinforced with iron hinges. Inside, long wooden desks stretch beneath tall windows glazed with cloudy horn panes that soften the weak daylight. Candles flicker beside stacks of parchment, while scratching quills fill the room with quiet, steady rhythm. Several monks sit bent over manuscripts in absolute concentration. Ink-stained fingers, bent backs, soft-muttered Latin. It feels less like a room and more like the inside of a thoughtful dream. Brother Aldrich approaches, carrying rolled parchment beneath one arm. He is elderly, narrow-faced, and somehow permanently dusted with tiny flecks of scraped vellum. "You've travelled far," he asks. "Far enough." "Excellent. Sit near the brazier before your bones turn monastic." You gladly obey. The monk settles beside you while apprentices continue copying text carefully across illuminated pages decorated with red and gold pigments. Tiny painted saints bloom along manuscript margins beside flowers, beasts, and occasional snails engaged in inexplicable combat. No one can quite agree why medieval manuscripts contain so many angry snails. Some mysteries endure forever. Brother Aldrich explains the work quietly while warming his hands. Parchment makers scrape sheep and calf skins smooth before stretching them tight upon wooden frames. Scribes copy prayers, histories, laws, letters, and holy texts one careful line at a time. Illuminators add painted details afterward using crushed minerals, lamp-black ink, and shell gold. The process takes months, sometimes years. A beautifully copied book can cost more than farmland. "People think monks merely pray," Brother Aldrich murmurs. "Mostly we sharpen knives and argue about spelling." A surprisingly relatable profession. An apprentice nearby carefully scrapes errors from parchment using a small curved blade. "Careful," Aldrich warns him gently. "Too much pressure ruins the skin." The boy nods nervously. You watch candlelight shimmer across wet ink while rain whispers softly beyond the walls. The room feels wonderfully still after so many muddy roads and noisy markets. Brother Aldrich shows you small glass jars filled with pigments. Blue from lapis stone, green from copper salts, red from crushed insects, gold leaf thinner than breath itself. Some swear illuminated letters carry extra holiness because beauty pleases heaven. Others claim wealthy patrons simply enjoy expensive prayers. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. At another desk, a monk copies medical remedies into a thick volume bound with leather straps. You glimpse instructions involving honey, vinegar, herbs, and alarmingly frequent bleeding. Useful text, you ask. Brother Aldrich sighs. Occasionally. Again, refreshingly honest. The monastery earns considerable income from manuscript work. Nobles commission family histories. Bishops order prayer books. Wealthy merchants purchase copied legal texts and psalters to display learning they may or may not possess. Good scribes receive steady food, warm lodging, and respect rare outside monastery walls. Poor scribes receive headaches. As evening approaches, bells ring once more through the abbey. Monks rise slowly from their desks. Quills are cleaned carefully. Candles trimmed. Manuscripts covered against dampness. The day's work ends not dramatically but gently, like snowfall settling across fields. Brother Aldrich walks beside you toward the guest-house refectory where supper waits coarse bread, onion soup, smoked fish, and weak ale brewed by brothers who apparently distrust excessive joy. Along the corridor walls hang shelves filled with chained books. Real chains. Books are valuable enough that monasteries often lock them in place to discourage wandering scholars from suddenly becoming very enthusiastic thieves. You pause before one enormous volume bound in cracked leather. "What's this?" Brother Aldrich smiles faintly. "A bestiary. A book about animals. And monsters. Naturally. Some swear distant eastern lands contain men with dog heads, serpents large enough to swallow horses, and birds that never land upon earth." Brother Aldrich shrugs mildly. I suspect travellers exaggerate. A comforting thought after recent conversations about haunted forests and saint teeth. Night settles quietly across the monastery while rain softens at last beyond the stone walls. Candles glow warm against the darkness. Ink dries slowly upon unfinished pages. And deep inside the peaceful hush of the scriptorium, beneath the smell of vellum and beeswax, patient hands continue turning fragile skins into words that may outlive kingdoms themselves. The monastery bells wake you before sunrise once again. Not harshly, never harshly. Their sound rolls gently through the stone corridors like warm water through old channels, soft enough that for a moment you remain wrapped beneath wool blankets simply listening. Rain has finally passed during the night. In its place comes a brittle cold that settles against the abbey walls and paints silver frost along the window edges. Somewhere outside, crows complain from the orchard trees. Inside the guest house, a novice moves quietly between sleeping travellers carrying a beeswax candle protected inside a horn lantern. The little flame throws golden circles across whitewashed walls and worn stone floors, polished smooth by centuries of sandals. You rise slowly. Your boots, thankfully, are only moderately damp this morning, which in medieval terms qualifies as extraordinary luxury. Breakfast in the refectory arrives with monkish efficiency brown bread, cheese, weak ale, and apple preserves stored from autumn harvests. Brother Aldrich joins you beside the hearth while warming ink-stained fingers around a steaming cup of herb broth. You leave today, he asks. I think so. Good. You blink. The old monk smiles faintly into his cup. Travellers who stay too long become monks accidentally. A horrifying possibility. Outside the monastery walls, the world gleams pale beneath frost and thin winter sunlight. Smoke rises straight upward from village chimneys into clear cold air. Cartwheels crunch across frozen mud, while villagers hurry through the morning wrapped tightly in cloaks and scarves. You thank the brothers for shelter and step once more onto the pilgrim road. The route eastward stretches between bare hedgerows and frozen fields, where crows hop among stubble left from autumn harvests. Frost whitens the grass like scattered salt. Your breath hangs ahead of you while distant bells continue echoing faintly behind the monastery. Travel feels easier today somehow. Cleaner skies. Sharper air. Even Rags appears energized, darting ahead across the roadside before returning proudly with absolutely nothing useful. By midday the road grows busier. Pilgrims walk in small groups carrying staffs decorated with shells, ribbons, and holy badges. Merchants guide mule carts loaded with wool bales beneath leather coverings stiff from frost. A tinker passes ringing tiny brass bells to announce his arrival at villages ahead. And among them all travels a narrow-faced man wearing layered robes lined with fur despite the cold not quite justifying such drama. You notice him first because everyone else notices him first. He rides a small grey mule burdened with chests and leather satchels sealed in waxed cloth. Strings of tiny holy medals dangle from the saddle. Rolled parchments protrude from one satchel, beside bundles of charms tied carefully with ribbon. The pilgrims nearby whisper softly as he passes, "A pardoner?" The man reins his mule beside a roadside shrine where travellers have stopped to rest and warm themselves around a small fire built from gathered brushwood. You join them gladly, holding stiff hands toward the flames while frost slowly melts from your cloak. The pardoner dismounts gracefully. Too gracefully, perhaps. His boots are cleaner than anyone else's. A suspicious detail on medieval roads. Still, he smiles warmly at the gathered travellers. "Peace upon this cold day," he announces. His voice flows smoothly, practiced from years speaking before crowds. A silver cross hangs against his chest beside several wax seals attached to folded church documents. At least they appear official from a respectful distance. The pardoner introduces himself as Master Lucian, licensed collector of alms and distributor of indulgences for the benefit of certain approved holy causes that become increasingly difficult to follow as his explanation continues. Mostly, however, he sells reassurance. In the medieval world, pardoners travel from town to town offering blessings, relics, indulgences, written pardons, and spiritual protections in exchange for donations. They occupy a peculiar place between church authority, wandering salesman, and very ambitious storyteller. Some are sincere, some are frauds. Most are probably both before supper. Lucian kneels beside the fire and carefully unwraps several objects from linen cloth. A tiny silver reliquary, a saint medal, a sealed parchment covered in elaborate Latin script. The pilgrims watch with wide eyes. This indulgence, Lucian explains gently, reduces the burden of confessed sins through proper prayer and charitable giving. A farmer beside you shifts nervously. Even serious sins. Lucian pauses thoughtfully. How serious? An uncomfortable silence follows. Rags sneezes into the firewood. The pardoner recovers smoothly. The mercy of heaven is vast, he says diplomatically. No one can quite agree how indulgences truly function. Church scholars argue endlessly over doctrine, while ordinary folk mostly hope not to burn forever after death. Fear travels quickly in this century, especially during winter nights beside weak candles and creaking roofs. Lucien understands this perfectly. He moves among the travellers with calm, reassuring confidence, offering blessings for journeys, prayers for dead relatives, charms against illness, and sealed pardons beautifully decorated with red wax. Many roads are dangerous now, he says softly while handing a parchment to an elderly pilgrim woman. Bandits, fever, sudden storms. The woman clutches the document like armour. Will this protect my son travelling north? Lucian places one hand solemnly upon his chest. Some swear prayers offered with honest faith can guide even lost souls safely home. A careful answer. Very careful. You watch him work beside the roadside fire while smoke drifts upward into the pale winter sky. His trade depends less upon lies than upon understanding exactly what frightened people most wish to hear. Around the fire, pilgrims speak quietly about harsh winters, plague rumours, and villages abandoned after sickness swept through too quickly for priests to bury properly. One traveller claims a town farther east nailed herbs above every doorway to keep death away. Another insists church bells rung at midnight drive evil spirits from the roads. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such things truly work. Yet everyone listens anyway. Lucian notices the little pilgrim badge beneath your cloak and smiles knowingly. Bridge Market Relic Seller. You laugh softly. How does everyone know? Because he owes me money. An unexpectedly direct answer. The pardoner settles beside the flames while nibbling coarse bread from a pouch. You travel alone, he asks. Mostly. Wise. He gestures toward the road stretching eastward between frosted trees. Groups bring arguments. Solitude brings wolves. One chooses according to preference. Again, medieval philosophy remains alarmingly practical. As daylight fades toward evening, the pilgrims gradually continue onward in scattered groups. Lucian packs away his parchments and relics carefully before mounting the grey mule once more. Before leaving, he hands you a tiny folded prayer written in cramped, careful Latin. For safe roads, he says. Does it work? He considers. It comforts people. Perhaps that is close enough. The pardoner rides eastward into the growing dusk while tiny medals clink softly against his saddle. Frost glimmers silver across the fields. Smoke rises from distant cottages where supper fires already burn warm against the cold. You tuck the folded prayer carefully inside your cloak beside the pilgrim badge. And as monastery bells drift faintly once more across the darkening countryside, you continue onward beneath the winter sky, carrying blessings that may or may not be real, but somehow still feel comforting in your pocket all the same. The road east grows rougher after the monastery lands. Stone markers become fewer, villages spread farther apart. The fields give way gradually to low, marshy ground threaded with narrow rivers that reflect the winter sky like strips of dull silver. Wind moves constantly here, bending reeds and carrying the smell of wet earth, wood smoke, and distant salt from unseen coastal waters farther east. By now, you travel with the steady patience of someone beginning to understand medieval roads properly. Not fighting the mud, not expecting comfort, simply accepting that boots remain damp forever and every warm fire feels briefly miraculous. Rags trots faithfully beside you, though occasionally distracted by birds, puddles, and personal philosophical disagreements with geese. The folded prayer from the pardoner still rests inside your cloak beside the little pilgrim badge. Perhaps neither possesses genuine holy power. Still, touching them during lonely stretches of road has become habit. People in this century carry charms the way others carry hope. Sometimes the difference feels small. Toward afternoon, the sky darkens again with low, heavy clouds. A sharp chemical smell begins drifting faintly across the marshland ahead. Not unpleasant, exactly. Just strange. Earthy, sharp, almost metallic. You soon discover the source. Beyond a line of bare willow trees sits a riverside dye yard surrounded by steaming vats, hanging cloth lines, and low timber sheds stained permanently with colour. Smoke and vapour rise into the cold air while workers move between boiling cauldrons, wrapped in heavy aprons and patched gloves. Even from the road you notice their hands. Blue. Deeply blue. Not decorative blue either. The kind of blue that suggests they have been arguing physically with paint for many years and losing consistently. Rag stops immediately and begins barking suspiciously at a length of fluttering crimson cloth hanging from a line. A worker glances over. "You keeping the dog?" she shouts. "I think so." "Good. Last traveller left his goat tied to the onion cart." A fair complaint. You step carefully into the dye yard where warmth rolls outward from steaming vats despite the bitter air. The entire place smells of smoke, vinegar, wet wool, stale urine, herbs, and boiling minerals. Medieval dyeing requires astonishing amounts of patience and surprisingly alarming ingredients. A broad-shouldered woman approaches carrying a stirring pole taller than herself. Blue stains reach nearly to her elbows. Passing through, she asks. You nod. Then avoid stepping in the green vat unless you wish to remain legendary forever. Helpful advice? The dyer introduces herself as Marta and gestures toward a small fire where workers warm clay cups of ale between tasks. You gladly accept a place near the heat, while around you the dye yard continues its smoky, bubbling rhythm. Lengths of wool hang drying beneath covered awnings rich scarlet, deep green, muddy brown, and brilliant blue expensive enough to impress bishops and frighten accountants. Marta notices your interest. Blue pays best, she says. Why? Hardest colour to make. She points toward a series of covered vats bubbling gently beneath wool blankets. Woad dye, one of medieval Europe's prized industries. The process, unfortunately, smells like something cursed by several generations simultaneously. Workers ferment crushed woad leaves into thick dye mixtures that stain cloth vivid blue. The labour is messy, exhausting, and remarkably profitable when successful. Merchants pay well for fine dyed fabrics. Nobles pay even better. Your nose wrinkles slightly as one vat lid lifts. Marta laughs. First rule of dye work, she says, never trust the smell. Reasonable wisdom from many professions, honestly. Nearby, apprentices stir steaming cloth with long poles, while another worker pounds fabric in wooden troughs to help set the colours. Steam curls upward into the cold afternoon air. The ground beneath your boots squelches unpleasantly. Some swear dyers know secret recipes passed only through families. Others claim certain colours require moonlight, blessed water, or charms buried beneath the vats. No one can quite agree. Marta herself wears a tiny iron key around her neck tied with blue thread. For luck, you ask? For locking doors? A practical woman. She explains that dye theft happens often because formulas hold enormous value. Rival workshops spy constantly on one another. Apprentices sometimes leave secretly to sell techniques elsewhere. One wealthy merchant apparently tried bribing a dyer with a mule, 2 silver cups, and a trained falcon. Did it work, you ask? Marta snorts. Falcon bit him. Excellent. The workers here earn steady wages despite the harsh labour. Coloured cloth transforms ordinary wool into luxury goods worth fortunes in city markets. Scarlet dyes especially command ridiculous prices because the pigments travel from far southern lands through dangerous trade routes. You watch one apprentice carefully lower pale cloth into a steaming blue vat. At first nothing happens. Then slowly, as air touches the fabric, blue spreads across the wool like dawn creeping over snow. It feels oddly magical. Even Marta watches quietly. Best part, she admits softly. The dye yard falls briefly silent except for bubbling vats and crackling fires. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether dye workers are craftsmen, alchemists, or witches tolerated because fashionable nobles enjoy expensive sleeves. Considering the smell here, perhaps all three. As evening approaches, the workers gather near the main fire to eat supper from wooden bowls, cabbage stew, coarse bread, and smoked eel caught from the river. You join them gladly while cold wind rattles the hanging cloth lines overhead. One elderly worker holds up permanently stained fingers. Been blue 20 years, he says proudly. Does it wash off? Probably after death. Another apprentice claims certain dyers in the southern cities deliberately stain their hands to prove professional skill. Marta rolls her eyes. Or poor bathing habits. The firelight flickers across tired faces while steam continues rising from the vats into the darkening sky. Beyond the dye yard, marsh birds call softly through gathering dusk. You mention the pardoner and his road blessings. Several workers immediately touch charms hidden beneath their tunics. A younger woman spits lightly into the fire. Best protection is staying indoors during storms. Again, difficult to argue with. Still, one old dyer insists travellers should always carry rowan wood against evil spirits near marsh roads. Especially winter nights, he says quietly. Why winter? The old man stares into the flames a while before answering. Because darkness lingers longer then. No one laughs. Outside the yard, twilight thickens across the reeds and frozen fields. Lanterns are lit beside the vats while workers secure drying cloth against coming frost. Blue-stained water runs slowly through drainage channels toward the river beyond. Marta eventually offers you space in one of the storage sheds for the night. Warmer than the road, she says. An easy decision. You settle among bundled wool bales while outside the dye yard continues its slow bubbling labour beneath lantern glow and drifting steam. Rags curls beside your boots already asleep. And through cracks in the wooden walls, you watch strips of brilliant cloth sway gently in the cold night wind, like fragments of strange medieval dreams, dyed blue enough to outlast memory itself. Morning rises pale and silent over the marsh country. Frost clings thickly to the hanging cloth lines outside the dye yard, turning blue wool silver at the edges. Thin ice skins over puddles beside the vats while smoke drifts lazily upward from banked fires kept alive through the night. The workers wake early. Always early. Steam already curls from boiling cauldrons before sunrise fully reaches the reeds. You help Marta carry buckets from the river while Rags races uselessly along the bank barking at ducks that ignore him completely. The cold bites hard enough to sting your lungs. Every breath smells of wet earth, wood smoke, and faint lingering dye fumes that seem permanently woven into the place itself. Before you leave, Marta presses a strip of blue cloth into your hand. For luck, she says. Does it work? Better than prayers against mud. Again, practical wisdom. You tie the cloth around your wrist and continue eastward along the frozen river road, while the dye yard fades behind drifting steam and hanging banners of colour. The countryside grows quieter here. Fewer farms. Fewer travellers. More wind. By midday the sky turns hard and white like old bone. Frost crackles beneath your boots while distant marsh grasses bend beneath cold gusts. You pass abandoned cottages half swallowed by reeds, where roof beams sag inward beneath years of neglect. Some swear plague emptied these villages decades ago. Others claim flooding drove people away. Even now, it is hard to tell whether abandonment comes faster from sickness, hunger, or simple exhaustion. The road eventually reaches a small riverside town enclosed by low timber palisades darkened with age and rain. Smoke rises weakly from chimneys. Market stalls stand mostly empty despite the hour. People move quickly here, heads lowered against the cold. Something feels wrong immediately. Quiet wrong. Not dangerous exactly. Just strained. A guard near the gate notices your hesitation. Passing through, he asks, "For now, don't linger near the east lane." You glance toward a cluster of shuttered houses beyond the market square. Why? The guard adjusts his cloak uncomfortably. Fever. Ah, that explains the silence. Throughout the medieval world, sickness arrives often and leaves unpredictably. Villages may survive untouched one winter, then lose half their people the next. Physicians argue about causes, priests lead processions, housewives burn herbs. Everyone watches everyone else cough. The guard notices the blue cloth around your wrist. Dyer's token. You nod. Keep it. Some swear blue wards illness. Interesting if true, convenient if fashionable. You move cautiously through the town while bells toll softly from the parish church. Many doors display bundles of herbs hanging above thresholds. Rosemary, garlic, juniper, dried lavender. Folk cures bloom everywhere fear settles. Near the east lane, however, the atmosphere changes completely. The houses there stand marked with strips of pale cloth tied across doors. Windows remain shuttered tight. Smoke rises from only a few chimneys. And at the entrance to the lane sits a lone figure beside a brazier, wrapped in layers of heavy wool and leather. Watching. A plague watcher. You approach slowly. The watcher lifts tired eyes beneath a fur-lined hood. A wooden staff rests across his knees beside a small bell and several covered baskets. "Road's open," he says quietly. "Lane isn't." His voice sounds rough from cold air and too little sleep. You remain near the brazier where heat flickers weakly against the afternoon frost. The watcher gestures toward an overturned crate. "Sit if you like. Wind's miserable today." You accept gratefully. Up close, the man appears exhausted beyond measure. Grey stubble shadows his face. His gloves are patched repeatedly. One sleeve bears stains from herbs and smoke. How long have you watched here, you ask? 8 days. A pause. Maybe 9. Time blurs easily beside sickness. The watcher explains his duties simply enough. He delivers food to isolated households, keeps frightened townsfolk from entering or leaving the marked lane, counts days since the last fever death, and rings the bell if conditions worsen. Not glamorous work. Not safe either. Still, the town pays surprisingly well because almost nobody volunteers eagerly to sit beside plague houses through winter. No one can quite agree whether the sickness spreads through air, touch, or bad luck, he mutters while feeding sticks into the brazier. What do you think? He stares toward the shuttered lane a while. I think people get lonely. That answer settles heavier than expected. From somewhere inside the quarantined houses comes faint coughing. Then silence again. The watcher unwraps bread and onions from cloth bundles while explaining that priests visit every few days, though usually from a respectful distance. Herbs are burned nightly. Vinegar bowls sit beside doors. Some families hang charms carved from rowan wood or iron nails above windows. One woman apparently nailed an entire eel skeleton above her threshold because her grandmother swore plague-feared fish. Results remain inconclusive. Rags edges nervously closer to the brazier, unusually quiet for once. The watcher scratches behind the dog's ears absently. Good animal. He followed me from a ratcatcher's village. Smart enough to leave rats behind. A church bell rings slowly across the town square. The watcher counts under his breath. 3 today, he says. Deaths. Hours. Another uncomfortable medieval distinction. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether plague watchers are brave, desperate, foolish, or simply poor men trapped between fear and wages. Perhaps all 4. As daylight fades, a woman emerges briefly from one quarantined doorway carrying an empty water bucket. Her face looks pale beneath a wool scarf. She keeps distance carefully. The watcher rises immediately. You need anything? More firewood, she answers softly. I'll bring some before dark. She nods once before disappearing indoors again. The exchange lasts only moments. Yet afterward the watcher stares into the brazier flames for a long while without speaking. Eventually he says quietly, People stop looking at you after enough days here. You're not certain whether he means the sick or himself. Cold wind rattles the lane shutters while smoke drifts low across the rooftops. Nearby townsfolk avoid the eastern quarter entirely now. Even footsteps seem quieter here. You help the watcher carry chopped wood from a nearby shed as dusk settles over the town. Frost thickens silver across the lane stones. Somewhere behind shuttered walls, someone begins singing softly. Not happily, just softly enough to remind themselves they remain alive. The watcher leaves bread and firewood outside each marked doorway without crossing thresholds. Practical caution governs everything now. Some swear plague enters through bad air after sunset. Others refuse to touch coins handled by strangers. A merchant in the square reportedly wears garlic around his neck thick enough to season an entire monastery. Fear makes poets of everyone eventually. Night approaches fully by the time the watcher returns to the brazier once more. He rings the small handbell gently toward the square. One clear note. A warning. A reminder. Then silence settles again across the frozen town. You rise at last to seek lodging before curfew closes the gates. The watcher nods tiredly as you leave. Travel safely, he says. You too. He glances back toward the shuttered plague lane. I stay here. The brazier crackles softly behind him while frost gathers on the silent houses, and bells continue tolling faintly through the winter dark. And as you walk away beneath the cold evening sky, the lonely figure of the plague watcher remains beside his little fire at the edge of the quarantined street, keeping vigil where most others no longer dare to stand. The frost deepens overnight. By dawn, the riverside town lies silent beneath a pale white crust that softens rooftops, fences, and muddy streets into something almost peaceful. Smoke rises thinly from chimneys into a sky clear enough to reveal sharp winter stars fading slowly above the eastern horizon. You sleep poorly at the inn. Not because of discomfort. Medieval inns always contain discomfort in generous supply. No, it is the bells. All night the parish church marked the passing hours, while somewhere farther off the little warning bell of the plague watcher rang occasionally through the cold darkness. Soft sounds, lonely sounds. Even now, while you lay stiff boots beside the dying hearth fire, you find yourself listening for them. The innkeeper serves hot onion broth in silence, while travellers prepare quietly for the road. Everyone speaks softer in towns touched by sickness, as though loud voices might somehow attract unwanted attention from heaven. Before leaving, you glance once more toward the eastern lane through the frost-clouded window. The watcher still sits beside his brazier, a small figure wrapped in smoke and cold. Rags winds softly near the door. Then the road pulls you onward again. You leave through the western gate beneath pale sunrise and follow the river northward this time, away from the marshes and toward older stone country, where low hills rise gradually beyond frozen fields. Thin ice rims the river banks. Bare trees creak softly in the wind like old ships settling at anchor. Travellers remain scarce. A shepherd passes leading woolly sheep toward winter pasture. 2 monks ride mules loaded with cider barrels. A woman carrying baskets of dried herbs walks in silence with frost sparkling across her cloak hem. The road itself feels ancient here. Roman stones still surface occasionally through the mud like buried bones from another age. Some cracked milestones lean sideways beneath moss and lichen, their carved letters half swallowed by time. No one can quite agree whether the old empire truly built roads that never ended. But the stones remain. By midday clouds gather once more, thick and low over the hills. Snow threatens again. You pull your cloak tighter while Rags trots ahead, leaving crooked paw prints across the frozen ground. Then you hear water. Not the river. Something louder. Steadier. The road bends sharply between rocky slopes, and there before you stands an old stone bridge arching across dark rushing water far below. It is beautiful in the tired medieval way. Weathered. Moss-covered. Solid enough to outlive everyone currently using it. At one end rises a narrow stone tower no larger than a cottage chapel. Smoke curls from its chimney. Tiny bells hang beneath the roof beam above the doorway, chiming softly in the winter wind. A bridge hermit. You approach slowly while the river roars beneath the arches. The hermit sits outside beside a brazier warming gloved hands over glowing coals. He wears layered robes patched so many times the original cloth has become theoretical. His beard spills halfway down his chest. Tiny carved charms hang beside the tower door fish bones, iron nails, bird feathers, little wooden saints blackened by weather. And beside him rests a small wooden toll chest. "Of course." The hermit watches you approach with sharp grey eyes, surprisingly alert for someone living alone beside a freezing bridge. Crossing, he asks, "If the bridge allows." "The bridge allows everyone." He taps the chest. "I merely encourage gratitude." A diplomatic description of toll collection. You drop a small coin into the box. The hermit nods approvingly. "Wise traveller." Rags sniffs suspiciously at the bells hanging overhead. "Careful," the hermit warns. "Dog rings those after sunset and river spirits start asking questions." You pause. The hermit pauses longer, then finally grins beneath his beard. Mostly joking. Mostly. Bridge hermits occupy peculiar roles throughout the medieval world. Some maintain crossings and guide travellers through dangerous terrain. Others live partly as holy recluses, praying beside rivers and roads. Many survive on tolls, alms, gossip, and the endless human need to ask strangers for directions. This particular hermit appears highly skilled in all four. He invites you toward the tower hearth while snow begins drifting lightly from the thickening clouds above. Inside, the little stone room glows warmly beneath hanging lanterns and beeswax candles stubbed nearly to nothing. Shelves line the walls crowded with dried herbs, river maps, fishing hooks, saints' relics of uncertain authenticity, and enough odd objects to concern any reasonable bishop. A kettle simmers above the fire. The air smells of smoke, rosemary, damp wool, and fish stew. Honestly magnificent. The hermit introduces himself as Brother Oswin, though whether he belongs officially to any monastery remains unclear. A narrow cot occupies one corner beside stacks of chopped wood and carefully bundled parchment letters sealed with wax. You carry messages too, you ask. Sometimes. He pours hot broth into clay cups. Travellers pay extra for privacy. Another profitable medieval side business. You warm frozen hands beside the fire while outside snow thickens steadily across the bridge stones. Tiny bells above the doorway chime whenever wind gusts through the arch. Brother Oswin watches the river through a narrow window slit. Flood took 3 carts last spring, he says calmly, and 1 bishop. That seems serious. River returned the bishop 2 days later. A pause. Less cheerful by then. Medieval roads constantly balance between danger and inconvenience. Bridges especially become places of stories, rumours, tolls, and superstition. Travellers whisper about ghosts walking old crossings after dark or spirits waiting beneath black water. Some swear drowned pilgrims still knock at bridge towers during storms. Others insist rivers remember every body they carry. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Brother Oswin himself claims the bells above the bridge ring differently whenever snowstorms approach. Can they truly? No. He sips broth thoughtfully. But travellers behave better if you sound mysterious. At least honesty survives here too. Throughout the afternoon, visitors come and go across the bridge. A wool merchant leading mules. A pair of armed riders splashed with mud. An old woman carrying cages full of chickens that complain continuously about winter and existence generally. Brother Oswin knows something about everyone. Who married badly? Which village lost sheep? Where roads washed out? Which lord recently argued with which abbot over fishing rights? The bridge hermit functions less like a lonely holy man and more like the entire countryside's unofficial newspaper. One merchant pauses long enough to warm himself by the hearth. Road north dangerous now, he mutters. Bandits near the forest edge. Brother Oswin grunts. Real bandits or taxmen? The merchant considers carefully. Hard to tell in snow. Fair again. As evening approaches, snow blankets the bridge completely. Travellers stop arriving. The river below darkens into moving shadow beneath the arches, while wind whistles softly through cracks in the tower stones. Brother Oswin lights extra candles against the gloom. Their warm glow fills the little room with flickering gold. You notice several pilgrim badges hanging above the hearth beside rusted keys and tiny carved saints. Gifts, you ask. Memories. Interesting how often medieval people collect objects instead of explanations. The hermit eventually pulls a wool blanket around his shoulders and settles near the fire. Storm's worsening, he says, you'll stay tonight. Not quite a question. Outside, snow swirls across the ancient bridge beneath the fading light. Inside, The bells continue chiming softly above the tower while the river rushes endlessly through darkness below. And in the warm little shelter beside the crossing, surrounded by candles, gossip, and the quiet company of passing roads, the bridge hermit keeps watch over travellers moving slowly through another long medieval winter night. Snow continues through the night, whispering softly against the stone tower while the river below roars unseen in darkness. You sleep beside Brother Oswin's hearth, wrapped in wool blankets that smell faintly of smoke and rosemary. Rags curls tightly against your legs, occasionally twitching in dreams that likely involve heroic battles against geese. Toward dawn the storm finally weakens. Silence settles first, then distant crows, then the soft chiming of the bridge bells stirring gently in the cold morning wind. You wake to the smell of oatcakes warming over the fire. Brother Oswin stands near the doorway, peering thoughtfully through falling mist toward the road. "Sky's clearing," he says, which means trouble travels again. A wonderfully medieval weather forecast. Outside, the world gleams white beneath fresh snow. The bridge arches curve across the dark river like frozen moonlight, while frost sparkles along every stone. Bare branches hang heavy beside the banks. Smoke rises from distant cottages hidden among the hills. Travel after snowfall feels strangely peaceful. Cleaner. Quieter. Even muddy roads pause briefly beneath winter's cover. You thank Brother Oswin for shelter and continue northward, while the bridge hermit watches from beside his chiming bells. Before you leave, he presses a small iron nail into your palm. For luck on roads. Does it work? He shrugs. Mostly keeps pockets from feeling empty. Fair enough. The road climbs gradually through wooded hills where snow muffles every sound except the soft crunch beneath your boots. Sunlight filters pale through bare branches overhead. Frost clings to mossy stones and fallen logs like powdered glass. Rags bounds ahead joyfully, plunging nose first into snowdrifts for reasons known only to dogs and perhaps saints. By midday you reach a larger settlement spread beneath the walls of an old manor house. Smoke curls thick from chimneys. Market wagons crowd the square despite the cold. People move briskly between stalls wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, while church bells ring somewhere beyond the rooftops. A festival atmosphere hangs lightly over the town. Not grand, not joyful exactly, but lively enough to break winter's heaviness. You soon discover the reason. The manor lord hosts a midwinter feast tonight, and where there are feasts, there are entertainers. Near the square, beneath striped awnings dusted with snow, musicians tune fiddles beside jugglers tossing wooden balls with frozen fingers. Ale sellers shout cheerfully beside steaming barrels of mulled drink. Children chase one another through slush, while merchants sell roasted chestnuts and honey cakes wrapped in cloth. And at the centre of the noise stands a man dressed in patched crimson and green wool with tiny bells sewn into his sleeves. The jester. He balances atop an overturned barrel while speaking rapidly to a growing crowd gathered beneath drifting chimney smoke. And so, he declares dramatically, the bishop told the pig. Laughter erupts before the joke even finishes. An impressive skill. The jester notices you immediately. People in his profession notice everyone immediately. He leaps lightly from the barrel and bows with theatrical flourish. Tiny bells jingle softly from his sleeves and cap. "Traveller," he says warmly, "you appear cold, tired, and moderately suspicious of humanity." Accurate. Wonderful. You'll fit in perfectly. His name is Thomas. Or perhaps not. Jesters change names frequently depending on employers, debts, and whether local guards currently seek them for insulting nobility too accurately. Still, Thomas wears confidence like armour. You follow him toward the manor kitchens where entertainers gather before the evening feast. Smoke pours warmly from enormous chimneys into the winter sky, while servants hurry through the snow carrying baskets of onions, trenchers of bread, barrels of ale, and enough roasting meat to feed a minor army. The smell alone nearly lifts your soul from your body. Inside the servants' hall, chaos reigns beautifully. Cooks shout. Dogs steal scraps. Musicians argue about tuning. A goose escapes briefly and achieves several impressive tactical victories before recapture. Thomas moves through it all effortlessly, greeting servants, teasing guards, borrowing food, and somehow acquiring hot cider without paying. Professional skill, clearly. Jesters occupy strange places in medieval households. Official fools, entertainers, singers, storytellers, mimics, and sharp-tongued companions. They survive through wit balanced carefully against danger. A clever fool may mock nobles openly in ways no ordinary servant dares attempt. A foolish fool, unfortunately, stops working very quickly. Thomas collapses beside the hearth while warming long fingers over the flames. Feasts pay well, he says, especially winter ones. Nobles fear silence after dark. He gestures round the bustling kitchens. Music distracts people from weather, taxes, and relatives. Again, timeless wisdom. You help carry firewood for the cooks while Thomas rehearses jokes quietly beneath his breath. He tests phrases the way falconers test leather straps carefully, attentively, always aware that one mistake can draw blood. Never mock a lord's sword, he advises. What do you mock? The lord. A dangerous profession indeed. As dusk settles outside, the manor hall transforms beneath torchlight and candles. Long tables fill with steaming platters, roast venison, smoked fish, cabbage pies, onions soaked in butter, coarse bread, honey cakes, and heavy winter ale foaming in clay cups. Rushes freshly scattered across the floor release scents of mint and lavender beneath hundreds of footsteps. Minstrels begin playing near the hearth. Servants move constantly through the hall carrying trenchers and pitchers, while snow falls softly beyond the shuttered windows. Thomas waits near the dais, adjusting tiny bells sewn into his sleeves. Nervous now. You notice it suddenly beneath the confidence. His hands shake slightly. No one can quite agree whether fools speak truth safely or dangerously, he murmurs. Which is it tonight? That depends how much the Lord drinks. Fair answer again. The feast begins with prayers, then eating, then louder eating. Eventually the Lord waves impatiently toward the entertainers. Thomas steps forward into the firelight and transforms entirely. His posture sharpens. His voice fills the hall effortlessly. Stories spill from him like warm-ale tales of greedy abbots, foolish knights, stubborn mules, disastrous marriages, freezing roads, dishonest relic sellers, and one suspiciously familiar tooth drawer who apparently removed the wrong bishop's tooth entirely by accident. The hall roars with laughter. Even the Lord wipes tears from his beard. Thomas dances between jokes carefully, never insulting too directly, never flattering too obviously. The art lies in balance. Some swear great jesters survive because nobles secretly hunger for honesty. Others insist fools merely learn which truth sounds safest when wrapped in laughter. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Hours drift warmly onward beneath candles and music while snow deepens outside the manor walls. Rags sleeps beneath the lower tables surrounded by sympathetic cooks, feeding him scandalous amounts of meat. Thomas eventually joins you beside the hearth during a pause between performances. You travel tomorrow, he asks. I think so. He nods thoughtfully while staring into the flames. Roads never end, he says softly, only stories beside them. For once, the jester sounds tired rather than playful. The hall continues glowing around you, torchlight on oak beams, music drifting through smoke, winter winds scratching softly beyond the shutters, and amid warmth, laughter, and the endless turning rhythm of medieval life, the household fool returns once more to the firelit centre of the hall, carrying humour carefully through darkness like a candle shielded against the cold. Morning arrives slowly after the feast. The manor hall smells of extinguished candles, spilled ale, cold ashes, and the heroic remains of last night's onions. A few exhausted servants sleep upright against the walls, while others already begin sweeping rushes into baskets, with expressions suggesting deep personal betrayal by merriment itself. Outside, winter sunlight glows pale through thinning clouds. Snow still covers the fields beyond the village, though already patches of muddy road emerge beneath cartwheels and footsteps. Smoke rises softly from chimneys. Somewhere in the distance, monastery bells ring the first hour after dawn. Thomas the Jester sleeps beside the hearth wrapped in a patch blanket, one bell-covered sleeve dangling toward the floor. Rags lies beside him, snoring faintly after an evening of criminally successful kitchen theft. You gather your cloak quietly. The road waits again. It always does. Before leaving, you step outside into the cold morning air where frost sparkles cross wagon tracks and bare branches sway gently overhead. The manor servants move slowly through the yard, carrying water buckets and splitting wood for the day's fires. Winter sunlight touches the hills beyond the village in pale silver. For a long moment you simply stand there, breathing the cold air and listening. The distant bells, the creak of carts, the crackle of chimney smoke, the muffled rhythm of boots on snow, all the little sounds of the medieval world continuing onward exactly as it did yesterday, and likely exactly as it will tomorrow. You think of the strange people met along the roads these past weeks. The suspicious money changer weighing clipped silver beneath candlelight. The leech gatherer standing knee-deep in frozen marsh water before dawn. The relic seller smiling beside his crimson booth full of holy uncertainty. Martin the rat-catcher and faithful little Rag stalking granaries through smoky villages. The falconer lifting hawks into cold winter skies above Blackwater Keep. The professional mourner singing names softly beneath chapel candles. The wandering tooth-drawer carrying a rattling box of memories from town to town. The patient monks scraping words carefully onto stretched skins by candlelight. The pardoner offering comfort folded neatly into parchment and wax. The blue-handed dyers coaxing impossible colours from steaming vats. The lonely plague watcher beside his brazier at the edge of silence. Brother Oswin listening to river water beneath his bridge bells. And Tomas the fool laughing carefully before powerful men. Strange trades, unlikely livelihoods. Yet each one holds the world together in small, invisible ways. Medieval life is often remembered through kings, battles, castles, and grand cathedrals, but most days belong instead to quieter people carrying out ordinary work beneath smoke-dark rafters and winter skies, men and women warming numb hands beside fires, mending straps, ringing bells, stirring dye vats, feeding hawks, counting coins, copying prayers, guarding bridges. People surviving one cold season at a time. You begin walking once more. The road north curves gently through snowy fields where crows hop among frozen furrows. Thin sunlight glows weakly through drifting clouds. Rags trots faithfully at your side, occasionally plunging nose first into snowbanks for deeply important reasons. Your boots still ache. Your cloak still smells faintly of smoke. The little pilgrim badge still rests inside your tunic beside the pardoner's folded prayer and the bridge hermit's iron nail. Tiny objects collected along long roads. Memories more than protections now. The farther you walk, the quieter the world becomes. Villages thin out behind you. Open countryside stretches wide beneath the winter sky. Bare trees stand motionless beside frozen streams, while pale mist gathers low across distant hills. No one can quite agree whether roads remember the travellers who pass upon them. Yet sometimes it feels possible. You stop briefly beside an old roadside shrine half buried beneath snow. The painted saint within has faded almost entirely from weather and time. Someone recently left fresh rosemary there beside a beeswax candle stub protected in a clay dish. Even in lonely places, people still leave small kindnesses behind. The wind softens. Clouds drift slowly overhead. Far away, bells ring again. The sound carries faintly across the frozen countryside, softened by distance until it almost blends with the wind itself. You listen a while without moving, then continue onward. The medieval world around you begins settling gently into stillness now. The roads grow quieter, the fires warmer, the daylight shorter. You imagine the money changer back beneath his awning counting silver by candlelight, while rain taps softly overhead, the falconer checking sleeping hawks in their mews, Brother Aldrich trimming quills beside his manuscripts, while wax drips slowly across oak desks, Martyr covering steaming dye vats against frost, the plague watcher feeding his lonely brazier beneath shuttered windows, small lives continuing quietly through another winter evening, and somewhere perhaps, beyond rivers and hills you will never cross, the leech-gatherer wades once more into dark marsh water beneath pale dawn mist, while monastery bells echo faintly across the reeds. The thought no longer feels strange, only distant. The road beneath your boots becomes softer where snow still lingers untouched. Your breathing slows in the cold air. Rags walks closer now, no longer barking at every shadow or bird. Even the wind seems gentler. You pass beneath bare trees where tiny ice crystals glitter among the branches like scattered glass. Smoke rises far off from unseen cottages hidden among folds of land. Somewhere a lone crow calls once before silence returns. The world feels vast, but not empty, never truly empty. There are always fires burning somewhere beyond the hills, always bells sounding through fog or snowfall, always travellers crossing bridges at dusk while candles glow warmly behind shuttered windows. And though the roads may be long, muddy, cold, and uncertain, they remain filled with people carrying strange skills, old stories, quiet hopes, and worn tools from village to village beneath endless changing skies. The daylight fades slowly toward evening. Blue shadows spread gently across the snow. You pull your cloak tighter and keep walking at an easy pace while the last pale sunlight disappears behind distant hills. No hurry now, no danger pressing close, only the soft, steady rhythm of boots upon the winter road. The bells fade farther away. The wind softens further still, and at last the medieval world itself seems to dim gently around you like candlelight lowering after a long quiet feast, leaving only warmth, distant smoke, drifting snow, and the comforting knowledge that somewhere ahead another fire waits patiently in the dark.